Uh, I want to first say hello to the audience that's tuned in to us. You have tuned in to another Center of Contemporary Art Artist Talk. Welcome again. Today we're featuring 5 brilliant artists: Amanda Triplett, Rohena Khan, Diana Milma, Ellen Hochberg, and Avril Lund. All are showing in complement to the works of Selman Waldman, now on view in the Center of Contemporary Art newest exhibit, A Conversation Through Time and Space, through February the 20th. Audience, please note the text feature on your Zoom screen. If you have a question, there will be time for that as we get more towards the end of the conversation. But if you have a question for the artist, please text me directly via your screen. And again, I'm Eddie Reed, your host for today. And I'll refer your questions to the artist. Let's begin by having each of the artists tell the audience about their art self and about their own art message to the world. Rohena, I know that you're on. Why don't you start us off?
Sure, and it's Rohena. I know it's been forever, Eddie,
My
but it's
apologies.
all good. I'm a Seattle-based multidisciplinary artist. I was born and raised in Dhaka, Bangladesh. My art centers around themes of justice, migration, politics, and pop culture. I'm usually an abstract expressionist, but the kind of paintings I'm doing right now, especially the painting that's in this show, I like to call it narrative storytelling. And I like to introduce my art to the world as the face of modern Bangladesh.
Oh, wonderful, fantastic. Amanda, I know that you're on. You want to answer the question?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I am a craft-based textile artist who works with primarily with recycled materials. And I do installation, performance, and sculptural forms using sewing and textile work. And I explore themes around the internal landscape and the emotional body, and in relationship to the environment we're in and the kind of cultural narratives.
Thank you very much. Diana?
Yes, I'm an artist based in Oregon, where I grew up, and I'm also an art therapist, and I've done a lot of work over the years in the area of trauma and recovery. I also wrote and published a book on self-injury and body modification practices. In my art, I focus on trauma and loss in the landscape and how I experience that through my body and psyche.
Thank you. Ellen, you want to take a turn?
Yeah, my name is Ellen Hochberg, and I like to say I do 2 very different kinds of work. In my drawings and paintings, I primarily work with looking at shapes from nature and seeing the lines and the patterns that we see there in those nature forms. But then I feel like I do a whole different kind of work which kind of centers around social justice, especially themes that deal with women and girls. And for those, I'm much more, it's much more common for me to use sculptural, installation, video, those kind of techniques.
Thank you. Avril. Avril, are you there? There you go. Hi there.
Hi. Also, it's Avril, but it's been a while.
Oh boy, I'm sorry. I am.
It's okay. I'm also a Seattle-based artist. I work mostly in a variety of 2D media. For most of 2020, though, I was working in like different kinds of textile. My work tends to explore themes of identity through a lens of race and ethnicity, as well as gender and sex, and the political grounds that surround those ideas, but from an autobiographical standpoint, more to do with like personal memory.
Thank you, everyone, for that introduction. Really appreciate it. Now to the question. Please speak to how you see your artist's vision relating to Waldman's artist vision. And let's start with Ellen on that one.
Okay. I think what Selma and I kind of have in common, we have differences, but I think what we have in common is we both want people to see the humanity in our fellow human beings. It's so easy to otherize people. We've seen that in the last 4 years when it comes to things like the Muslim ban and statements about Mexicans being murderers and rapists. We've seen that in Rwanda in 1930s Germany. There was always, if you otherize another human being, it's so much easier to do cruel things to them. I mean, again, look at what happened on our southern border. I mean, the things that happened to children there were able to happen because some people in their brains could otherize those people, that they were different than us. So I kind of feel like that's one of the things that she and I have in common, is trying to get each other to see each other as human beings with that full complement of what that means.
Oh, wow. That's pretty amazing. To see each other. I think often I think that that is the objective, you know, really of an artist. I mean, that's just my point of view, as opposed to the idealization of others. I think we all know how hard that is to live up to an idealized view of oneself, or even how embarrassing that could be. You know, speaking as a person of color, I run into that one a lot in art, where you know, there's an idealization of the Black body. And I think Selma, that was one of the things that really attracted me to her work, is that that element was missing. It was real truth to me, very real truth to me. Rohena, want to take a shot at that question?
Eddie, Rohena.
Rohena, sorry about that. You did tell me that.
It's all good. So for me, learning about Selma's life and art, I was pretty shook. It had me thinking about how, without knowing about it, we share space and experience spaces with people who have walked a similar road as us. So I definitely felt that Selma and I share a similar journey in life and art, starting from like finding out from her obituary that she worked at that spice store at Pike Place Market that I absolutely love. When I actually discovered Selma's work, I felt like I was at a very, in lack of a better word, very hopeless kind of pandemic mindset. But then like when I started reading about her and experiencing her art, it was a sobering reminder of my journey as well, and of our shared dedication of fighting injustices. Like Selma, I paint a lot about human suffering. She and I both spend a lot of time thinking and learning about injustices the people of this world have suffered throughout time. And we create art about it so that these sufferings are not forgotten. Politics plays a huge role in both her art and mine. Politics gives people like us hope that change is around the corner if we stay consistent in our art. Selma's work also covered liberation movements around the globe. In her art, she supported the Palestinian people. She painted about colonial abuse, life during the apartheid, abuse in Iraq's Abu Ghraib prison. So her art is a voice against oppression, much like myself. And I feel like that is our shared artistic vision.
Thank you very much for that. Ellen?
Are you coming back to me, or?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to come back to you.
No
But
problem.
that was my error. Excuse me. Diana is who I meant to call. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, in terms of shared vision, obviously, you know, we share that intersection of art, trauma, giving a voice to people affected by trauma is something that I've been involved in for so long. I think that she understands the toll that violence that's taken out on some, it gets taken out on all of us. and she gives people that are affected a voice. But there was one quote that I read of hers that really resonated with me personally in my own art, which was, "Lust for power and territory is the same lust that kills man, women, children, and the land itself." And I've always thought about the surfaces of the artwork as a kind of skin, and that might relate either like to my own skin or just as well to the skin of the earth. Both I think are really fragile and precious, and on some level we're the same. So I feel like damage that's done to the earth, I feel viscerally in my own body and my skin. And I just really firmly believe that the damage that we do to one another also damages the earth.
Wow, that is so correct. I can most certainly resonate with that. Thank you very much. Avril, did I have you had a chance?
No, Avril, but
Uh,
you're very close. I feel that kind of similar to what Rohena was saying about the kinds of politics that Selma's work touches on. It's sort of similar to the, oh, sorry, I don't know who's at the door. It's similar to the topics that I address as well in my own work. I see it in my mind more as like I address the aftermath of those things a little bit more. So, for example, in the context of colonial violence, in politics, in war, all that stuff, instead of looking at the actual like sexual assault that was used as torture during the war, it's seeing how that transforms and gets translated into something else that survives, that is still just as violent, but is very much a descendant of that. So I guess it's more looking at like the legacy of those things that Selma talks about in her own work.
Thank you. Amanda?
Yeah, so I think the thing that really called to me or resonated between our works was this idea of kind of rooting into the emotional body. And by that, I mean like the body becomes a lightning rod or channel for the collective emotional narrative. So everything is kind of felt, that expression of everyone and how that filters through the body. And you really see in the dynamic expressionistic mark making that happens in her drawings that is representing this kind of internal landscape of the individuals that are experiencing acts of violence or being perpetrators of violence. So I think for me, I'm also interested in that internal world and that kind of how that filters in and out of into the world and into the body, from the world to the body. So
Filtering out. Yes, wonderful, wonderful view, wonderful vision that I get when listening to that one, taking that in. One of the things that and anybody feel free to chime in on this amongst our artist guests, is that advice, as I was listening to each of yours amazing explanation, the advice to viewers when viewing Selma's work, so that their thinking moves beyond the obvious visuals, of the nude body, etc. What advice could be given to the viewer to better prepare them to push a bit deeper past just the surface of Selma's work? Anyone can take that?
Can I say something? I've always personally found it really interesting when you know more about the artists themselves, what their journey has been through in life and the different struggles they've had throughout their life. To me, it gives a context to the work that may not be there in just the work itself. So I always find it really helpful to have some kind of a thing there that lets me know something about who that person was that made those pieces and what their story is and how their personal story turned into this story that you're looking at right now. So.
Great advice. As I look through, looking through the show, I think I think that the labeling of the pieces have been were pretty well done in that regard. Giving those kinds of clues to the viewer. The online model, particularly, where you can. I don't know how many of the audience know this, but when you view the online version of the gallery and you're in the 360 view, that you can actually tap on the pieces and get a fuller story about each piece that's there, and you're able. I think you're able to pretty well relate the accompanying artist's view with Selma Waldman's view, and make sense as to why that accompanying artist is being shown in conjunction with Selma. I'm curious as to how many of the artists actually have felt that experience as well. Anybody want to take that question?
As far as experiencing the gallery space virtually?
Yes, experiencing it virtually. And
I thought it was great. When I saw it, like just the layout of the show itself is incredible. And to be able to experience it still, despite not being in the space itself, I thought it was amazing.
You know what's unique about also about Waldman's work, and I want to hark back to what was said earlier about otherwise people. I've often wondered to what era, or even if to what event within an era that she is speaking to, as far as relating more to the humanity of the person that occupies her art. I was wondering if any of you happen to either wonder that same thing, or were able to relate more quickly to, or just relate to that otherwise person. It's a wonderful phrase. Anyone? We're unpacking that term, otherwise people, because I've seen this in all of your art, by the way, everybody. It seemed to me that you were all focusing on that, putting a face, putting an identity to the those who tend to go without identity or without face.
Yeah, I could say something about that. The piece, The Doll, I found it just, it was the piece that took me the longest to stop avoiding. It was, and I finally connected with it. Just the fact that she makes us look at the, just the offhand way that life is just thrown away, trashed. And in doing so, it makes us really become more aware of the preciousness of it.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Wonderful, wonderful interpretation. Speak to your specific piece. Let's do that. What's the commentary you're trying to convey to the viewer? And let's begin with Amanda on this one.
Sure. So Deep Skin it's the fourth in a series that are about membranes or skins. And I've been exploring the boundary, i.e. skin, between our beings, our bodies, and the environment and events around us. And so the work itself is abstracted from micro photography or cross sections of skin cells. And I'm interested, again, in both the protective quality of having this layer between our sensitive organs and our inner landscape and our emotions, which, you know, are often in this culture we repress or hide beneath the surface. And then also, as well as like the porosity of skin and what kind of is penetrated through. So this series was really about that, and deep skin is about the innermost layer of our skin, so that be the one that is like the closest to our blood and our guts, and also that emotional and landscape inside. So.
And to our viewers, I think if you're looking at the virtual gallery as we talk, and you tune into Amanda's piece, or all of the artists' piece, I think you really, you know, start to see that. Ellen, you have a video piece in the show, and so would you want to speak to that?
I do, and I'd also like to speak to how it came about too, because I think that's a really important part of it.
Oh, please do.
Again, back in the summer of 2015, as the presidential race was beginning, I began to hear just a lot of words that were being thrown around about otherizing people again. And, you know, about banning Muslims and, you know, keeping out people that don't look like us. And so I started thinking about how we assess each other. And one way that we do that is by what we're wearing, what clothing we either choose to wear, or perhaps as part of our religion or our cultural group. The other thing is your hair. Hair can, or the covering of your hair can be a big factor of what you look like, how you've chosen your individuality, or in some cases, how you've chosen to be part of a group. So I started thinking, what if we took all of that away? What if we reduced everyone to just their eyes? Because as human beings, it's something we all have. There's all kinds of wonderful poetic images about, you know, eyes being the window to the soul and all that kind of thing. So I wanted to collect a whole bunch of pictures of eyes. Now, I have a studio in the TK building, which is the same place where CoCA is located. And up until about a year ago, we were open every Thursday for First Thursday. And we would have lots of people that would come through on First Thursdays. So that particular month, I decided what I was going to do is I was going to ask people if I could take pictures of a picture of their eyes. So I set up a camera on a tripod. I set up some lights. And as people were starting to come through, I was going to ask them if I could take a picture of their eyes. Now, I was all ready for people to go, why do you want to take a picture of my eyes? What are you going to do with that picture? And being really skeptical of why I was collecting all of these images. So I started asking people. No one had any objections because I said, it's only my eyes. And I found that statement really interesting, for one thing, because I can recognize these people by their eyes. But so I started taking pictures of people's eyes. First Thursday basically kind of runs from about 6 to 8 p.m. So in those 2 hours that I was taking pictures of people's eyes, I ended up with over 160 pictures of eyes. 160 pictures in 2 hours. I literally had people lining up waiting for me to take a picture of their eyes. And what I found really fascinating about that was they were giving me a piece of themselves. Then as an artist, I was going to go and do something with that, and I've done a few pieces with these eyes that I collected, and I did a little, because of my own, maybe not the best photography, I did a little touching up of really my mistakes. If they had like smudge in the corner of their eye, I left it there. Their eye makeup wasn't looking great, I left it there. But what I found interesting is they gave me a piece of themselves. I kind of digested it, made something out of it. And then I started showing these images at First Thursday, and people were coming back and looking for their eyes. And so I just found this really fascinating. I'm trying to figure out what else to do with this concept of not just an artist making a picture that you make and then you put it on a wall somewhere and you hope someone will look at it, but to actually asking the public to give you the raw material or whatever to create that image and then give it back to them in a way. The other thing I just wanted to say too is that in the video, and it's just, if you haven't seen it, it's just literally it's people's eyes that are slowly dissolving between each other. And so you get also this really interesting in-betweenness too, where it's like when it's partially, like when there's that dissolve point where it's kind of both people at the same time, where it goes from a very old pair of eyes to a very young pair of eyes. I found that fascinating. But in the poem that's being read while I'm doing this is by Maya Angelou, and it's called Human Family. And it's basically about no matter where you go in the world, there's all these different people, but we're all basically kind of the same. And the poem ends with a line that's something, I think it's, but we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. And that to me was kind of the message, is try and help us see each other, like I talked about before, as seeing our common humanity, seeing how we are different, but how are we similar, and how are we connected to each other? So.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And once again, to the audience, if you're not doing it, you might want, and if you have an additional screen, you might want to pull up the show and just follow along with the artists as they are talking about their piece. Pretty dynamic way. Diana, you want to take the question?
Yeah, sure. And I just wanted to say also to Ellen, because my piece is right next to yours, how much I appreciate it, and what yours, how I saw it was as a witness of this whole show, and what Selma was saying, but just the eyes and just how it was, I thought that was really profound. So, but you know, your interpretation is maybe different. I don't know.
Not to interrupt you, Diana, but that's what I love about these talks is to hear a whole different perspective on what you saw it one way and you saw it a different way, and I love that.
Yeah, and it is so, witnessing is so, that's important. That's what it's about. Anyway, so about my piece, it's a small one, and the title is Midnight Rose, which I came from a China pattern from a little porcelain teacup. And porcelain is very delicate. It's really, really ancient, was invented in China thousands of, I guess, years ago, and surprisingly resilient. But when I was making the piece, I was thinking really about colonization, just the international trade of tea and porcelain itself and chocolate, and these things that have a lot of violence and destruction under the surface. So, and when I was making, I was thinking about, because I work with layers, and I was just thinking about that layer of kind of a dominant culture over deeper layers of vibrancy and diversity of more indigenous cultures. And I try to make the layers interact and talk to one another. And it was one of the things that really sparked me about the show, is the title of the show is Conversations in Time and Space, because it's a concept that I have a lot as I'm working. And then there are these rosettes in it. They could be kind of referring to like a pretty porcelain design, but I also think of them like a sort of a loose association to the sorts of tattoos and markings that we put on our skin and our boundary to reclaim our boundaries. And, one other thing about just the size of it, and I hadn't thought of it at the time, but looking at it later, just being entirely honest, it also is this great metaphor for this property that I live on, which is a small property that has a lot of tall trees and climbing roses up in them. And it's like every square inch of the property is something living on it and habitat. And over the years, I've watched all the properties around me get bulldozed, and the trees are disappearing, all the life, all the habitat is leaving. And so I feel like the footprint this is kind of my footprint. And I think about small footprint a lot, but I try to fill the one that I have with as much life and living things as I can. But I just have this overall sense that the landscape is shrinking. And I think that's, that's something that I'm just seeing in that piece as well.
Wow, thank you for that. And I was following along and really deep diving into your piece and that your explanation. Wow, it really took me to a lot of different places that I was kind of searching for as I looked at your piece. So thank you for that. Wonderful, wonderful journey. Avril, you want to take this?
Yes. So what my work in this show was speaking to specifically was more about it's about how specifically like women and girls and anyone who is not a cisgender straight man are viewed in the East. And it speaks to, again, sort of the repercussions that I was talking about of the kinds of violence that you see in war in Selma's bodies of work. It speaks to the repercussions of that and how those repercussions continue into the future. And for women and girls in particular, it a lot of times ends up translating to very misogynistic, very violence through sex kinds of repercussions, and to the point of even extrapolating that into the greed that fuels things like the sex tourism industry, which is very much a product of the way sex was weaponized and misogyny was weaponized. And that's what I was speaking to in the art that I submitted for this particular show.
Wow. Wow, that's pure power. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, Rohena.
Eddie, you got it. um, so my painting, it's called Never Stop Questioning. And I feel like it may be the most important painting of my life so far. The main takeaway of my painting is I will ask questions till my last breath. So when I started this painting in 2012, I was living in Bangkok, Thailand, and I knew it was going to be about not being able to speak up and about the oppression of women and about the ugliness of the patriarchy. But what I didn't realize after working on this painting for I think 5 years total, and in between I moved continents as well. But what I didn't realize when I started it was that it was going to be about myself when I ended it. So the subject of that painting is more or less about not having autonomy, not even over my own voice. It's about being kept hidden, about being sidelined, about being erased, even while you're alive. And that's something, as women, we experience in some parts of the world. And so in the painting, you'll see that basically it's actually a self-portrait. So I'm in the painting and I'm wearing a burqa, so like a Muslim headdress, and there's a ball gag in my mouth. So it kind of plays on the idea of how there is an invisible ball gag holding us back. So many things came into play in this painting, like, for example, the style of the burqa that I'm wearing. Even though like this style did exist in Bangladesh, like early 1900s or so, I feel like what actually had a great effect on me was the war on terror. When I saw like images of Afghani women in that burqa, and it left its impression because I was moved by how women were being treated by the Taliban and how, every woman in Afghanistan would have to wear that burqa when they leave their home. If they didn't, I remember at the time there were news reports that they would be whipped in public, or worse. So like I sat with it. I sat with this idea for 10 years, after which I started this painting. And, you know, while painting it, I understood. And in fact, like now looking back, I see not only is it an expression of my own journey, but it is also about the plight of Afghani women as well. I know what it's like to have the burden of Islamic modesty on me, as well as middle class patriarchy working against me. And I could only imagine how much worse it was for them, or for every rural woman out there. And, you know, so it all manifested in this painting. So, you know, 5 years later, this is what came out. And, you know, I came to, like, basically through this painting, I also came to realize that, you know, I would have to, like, I would never stop the process of questioning, which, you know, society has tried so hard to ingrain in me.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you for that. That was an amazing piece of sharing. I truly appreciate that. And as I'm listening to all of you, again, I'm reflecting on Selma's work, her legacy, if you will. And my curiosity after listening to those all of your amazing explanations is, what do you think that Selma, through her pieces, that she's asking of the viewer? And anyone can chime in on this. You know, what do you think? What do you think she's asking of the viewer?
Yeah, I could say something about that. I mean, I do think it's really important. She's she wants us to not to sensationalize violence and trauma, but to not trivialize it, to not normalize it.
If I could as well. I feel that it's very interesting seeing Selma's work in this time of intense information saturation, and just it's the rate at which information travels as well. There's so much of it all of the time that when a lot of times you are watching the news or on social media and seeing current events happening, and you see, you know, footage from here and everywhere around the world of blatant acts of violence, and it becomes this thing that I think probably all of us have at some point experienced, of being almost desensitized to it, of just like, it's there again, you know, you see it all the time. But I think what's interesting is that in a lot of Selma's work, you still have that same level of almost like jarring imagery. Well, it is pretty jarring imagery, but there's something about it where it feels like it invites you to actually see it, instead of just like observe that it is present, like to see it for what it is and why it is and how it is. That I think is really interesting to see her work contextualized in like today's environment of just trauma porn, basically.
Anyone else, the panel, care to respond to that question I posed?
May I?
Sure.
Keeping in mind that when Selma was creating a lot of this work, there wasn't this access to the internet that we have now, right? And so because of that, it was much easier to change people's view of history, if you will, by how the victors chose to do it. I mean, like, what comes to mind are the Holocaust deniers, that didn't even happen. So I saw some of her work as a way to help people remember some of these horrors, to not let them be swept under the rug, to let people understand that people were hurt, that bad things happened, and you can't just act like, no, well, that was in the past and let's just forget that, kind of thing. That was one of the things I feel like I saw in her work. I don't know, Rainer may be able to say more, knowing her more personally, but I think again, there's sort of an art historical point of view that's interesting, is when the artwork was created, Avril had a great point. We have a lot of things we see now, but there was a time when there was more control over what we see. And so I think that's kind of interesting too.
Wonderful. That's Yes, it's a that's an excellent point about the limitation of communication at that time. I think I was having a conversation with another local artist a few days ago about really around that very point, how much more easier, or is it much more easier, or is it really the same to live within our own echo chambers? Because I had to, I had to remind them, and I was reminded that, in the first quarter century or so of United States of America, you only had newspapers. And even that was an interesting piece of communication, considering what the literacy rate was in the country. So you had people who were hired to do the reading. We have wonderful names from English literature like a town crier or whatever, but we had that here in the U.S. And with that, the way in which communication happened really was up to the social construct of the reader. So, Selma, I thought it was of just a magnificent communication of the state of the world at that time, and all. And yeah, this day and age, what would her art look like, with this wider platform of communication? Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for that. Absolutely terrific question, and a great segue into our third and final question before I turn to the audience's questions that they have. There have been quite a few that have been coming in. I've been watching the tally on my screen. Avril, I would like to start with you with this question. What is the relationship between your showpiece and a particular Waldman showpiece that you would like the viewers to know?
Sure. I found the most resonance with the one that is called Wall of Perpetrators. I'm not good with Roman numerals. 4? IV is 4, I think. But I just found that one to have the most resonance because it sort of talked about the same root causes of the themes that I touched on in my own artwork. And it really comes down to people abusing power and trying to assert power, and how it translates to all these different, deep-rooted, very insidious modes of asserting it. And in trying to exact control over a population, and in my work, particularly over women, girls, non-traditional cisgender male persons, and into continuing that legacy to a point where you can continue to exploit these people for an individual or geopolitical or any kind of personal gain, I guess. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. That again, that just adds to the richness of the contextualization as I view your piece. Thank you for that. Rohena, please respond to the question. You're next.
Sorry, I was muted.
Oh, that's okay. No problem.
So I feel like the piece or her work that, I was moved by almost all of her work because the stuff she's worked on, it's a different time, but it's literally what so many artists are working on now. And, even after us, so many artists after us will be working on similar topics. So I felt like that, definitely played a part, but from her Black Book of Aggressors, I liked a drawing called Black Book of Aggressors 117, The Heavy Cable Wire. It was done in charcoal and pastel on black paper. And the context of this piece is it portrays US soldiers abusing their power at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. And I feel like this subject is, like, I remember when it happened, it had struck me pretty deeply back then as well. But to now see it, I mean, back then I had seen the news images, but like now to see it from Selma's perspective, it just went full circle for me in some ways. But why I chose this piece is because it explores abuse between humans, something I also dabble with in my art. And another thing I also noticed was that in Selma's art, you know, the gestural kind of strokes plus just like overall expressionist kind of characteristics of her work, they kind of they portray very traumatic subjects, but in a, like, basically they soften the blow in some ways. And I feel like that is also very similar to my art, because even though I work with like super dark subjects and, you know, things about human suffering and suffering of women, my art has a lot of pop culture elements to it to soften the blow of reality. So I felt like that was an interesting point where our art met. But another thing I felt like I was saying, like the legacy, like I feel like Salma's legacy, even though she and I are not related, and even though our paths never crossed in real life because she passed away way before I moved to Seattle, but you know, through her life, and not just in art, but also just the fact that, you know, she worked at that store I spent hours in, just like I feel like her legacy lives on through us, you know, as much as, you know, through her own work, because we carry it forward. You know, her work doesn't end with her work, but it also moves forward. It gains momentum through us as well, because we'll be carrying on the things she fought for.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Amanda, would you mind taking the question?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me, naked aggression and the wall of perpetrators, you can see this, she uses this very visceral palette, and you see it a lot in a lot of her work. And for me, I think there's this kindred use of color and kind of that indicates the guts and the inside, and there's something very evocative about that color palette, as well as the expressionist quality of her mark making that really really shows that in inner landscape. And it's not just a showing. I think for me, the thing that I was struck most about her work was how it evokes an empathic experience. I think for me, it's very hard to look at her work without immediately feeling the heaviness of the subject material. And she uses the gesture and that kind of the expressive quality of her mark making to convey that. So I think for me, that piece or that collection of pieces really resonated.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Ellen?
I think the piece that for me that was the strongest and I felt the most affinity towards was the doll, which I think Diana had mentioned before. And I think the reason it spoke to me so much is because I feel like she was representing that attempt to take a person's humanity away. Again, as I keep saying, the person in the drawing is naked, their clothing has been taken away, which is one way of identifying them. Their head is shaved. Another way to take away any individuality. And they're falling, it looked like to me almost. I mean, it's called a doll, so it might just be, you know, slumped over. It almost had this sense of falling. So like the person wasn't even in control of their physical body as they were going through space. That's kind of how I saw it. But it was a way to show the just absolute vulnerability of another human being put in that position where everything has been taken away from them. And yet it doesn't feel to me like he's down and out. I mean, it's still like he still is there. Do you know what I mean? He like when he lands on a slumped in the ground, he's gonna pick himself up in some way. So I think that again speaks to what I keep talking about, is this way of seeing each other as human beings and kind of maybe putting ourselves, I think Rohena talked about the fact of putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Like, how would you feel if this were you, kind of thought.
Wow. Diana, you get the last word on this question.
Okay, yeah. And, you know, same with you, Ellen. It was the doll that I did talk about it a little bit earlier. I think I read somewhere, my understanding of it was that she had been struck by, I guess it was probably photographs or video of bodies being dumped into like a mass grave, something like that. And that she had the ability to see that in like stopped time and see, and then make that into a real human. And that I related to that, just this like this our consuming and throwaway culture. And that it, you know, she makes us stop and look. And you know, and I agree with you that there was this beauty in the body, and you know, that fragility, and then at the same time that sense of resilience that just spoke to me anyway. And in my work, I use a lot of like throwaway materials, like all these like tea packets and chocolate wrappers and things like that. You know, trying to just get more aware of, you know, the just the stuff that we use, and they're just kind of numb to it. And I guess, you know, I just would encourage, I hope to, at least, I guess, with this work, to encourage everyone to kind of look through the surface of things, and especially these things that we consume in our everyday lives and lifestyles, and try to get a sense of how violence literally and insidiously gets under our skin.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful closed remarks. I want to take the time now. First of all, I have to tell you what a fantastic journey all of the participating artists took me on today. I'm highly appreciative of my vision of it, of just art in general, and particularly relating your works, all of your works, to Selma's work. Was incredibly enlightening. So once again, on behalf of CoCA, I want to thank you for all taking the time. All right, let's begin with the questions that were posed. One question, of course, they were all fantastic questions, but let's see. There was one. Let's see. Here is one that for me, this is from Emily. And the question was, a lot of these pieces are about personal trauma. Is it our responsibility to make these ideas accessible to everyone? And if so, how can we continue to hold space for the personal experience of artists? Any of my panelists can take that question.
Well, I think for me, art obviously is a place to put forth trauma, to pose a question, to reveal, and to be vulnerable. And I was talking to another artist recently about the importance of vulnerability because through vulnerability, we find commonality. I think for so long we've held on to our grief and our trauma. And when we speak to it, we find the universality of it, and people who may not have felt safe or comfortable to share those things feel liberated, because they may feel that someone is speaking their truth as well, and it may bring them closer to that. So I think particularly right now, it seems important to be vulnerable in our work and share those things that have for so long been unspeakable or repressed.
Any other members of our panel care to address that question? It's a very, very insightful question.
I feel like it's very important to, on both ends, I feel like for the artist, it's very important to express these feelings and these times through our art. And, so for the artist, it definitely evokes healing, because you're actually confronting, whatever it is. For the viewer, I feel like, and I've actually experienced this many, many times when people have seen my art and they've, come to me and said that, they've resonated a lot with it, or that they've never told anyone but then they've experienced the same thing. And seeing me talk about it, they feel more empowered to do it for themselves, or basically acknowledging hidden parts of themselves. So I feel like for both parties, it's very, very important. But I do understand how it's kind of, I don't know if I should call it cliche, but how art and suffering go hand in hand, and how should it be a glorification of suffering? Should art be a glorification of suffering? Like, is it really necessary to, portray this violence, for example? But I feel like it's, especially like now with the kind of work that I'm doing, which is like narrative storytelling, which is also the kind of work Selma was doing, it's a documentation of history. So, and for example, like last year I read that 70% of Americans don't know about the Holocaust, or don't believe the Holocaust happened, or basically know nothing about the Holocaust. And I feel like Selma's work, say the Falling Man series, it's just such a big, like it's the best thing that could introduce someone to the Holocaust, like the first step towards learning about the Holocaust for generations who don't know about it. So I feel like it's very important.
Could I make a really quick comment also to that question?
Still on mute.
Oh, sorry. Can I make a quick comment there? I just wanted to say that there is this idea in psychology about the hello? Okay, I don't know what's happening.
Gotcha.
Okay, there is this idea in psychology, this notion about the return of the repressed. And so you try to, it's about as much as you try to repress and hide and put down what, what has happened or what you don't want to look at, there it comes up, and it comes out, and it often comes out in ways that are really not good. So it is important to give a voice to these things.
One of the comments that was that came across, and I don't want to not mention this, but Rainer Atkins, who is Selma Waldman's son, surviving son, is also viewing the broadcast today. And he wanted to remind us that the doll is part of the Falling Man series. And there is a whole series. I had the pleasure of actually being able to view a good part of that series. And it's inspired by the film of bodies being thrown through space. And I do believe that several of the panelists made that reference as well. I want to draw attention to one more question I received. Cameron, if you're still on, could you show yourself and ask of the panelists that dying question that you have?
Yeah, sorry, here, 1 second.
Sure.
Yeah, hi. My question was, I do a lot of work in different mediums, and visual mediums are something that is I'm clearly not as dialed in as the rest of you guys on the panel, but it's also part of why I'm here. I'm very curious about like the process of finding those larger ideas or concepts or oppressions and issues, and the process of trying to find a way to accurately depict them in a way that feels personal to you as artists, but also feels accurate to the larger issue that you're connecting to. Because for visual mediums, obviously there's a lot of different options, but all of the pieces from all of you have been incredibly compelling, as well as ones that do an incredible job of sparking that dialogue of the issues that you guys are talking about. So I'm just very curious I apologize if that's a basic question, but I'm very curious about like the process of finding the links in that, especially for a medium that I'm not as familiar with.
Would any of our panelists care to start with that? Would care to take that question on? That is a really good one. Thank you, Cameron. That's a very intriguing question.
I feel my work is super research based. So now, for example, I'm working on a series called The Jumpers, and it's based on 3 times in American history when people have jumped to their deaths. And so it's a triptych, but it's large scale, so 10 feet by 6 feet, so pretty huge. And so the 3 parts are, the first is during slavery, from a slave ship. The second part is during World War II in Hiroshima, and the third part is 9/11. So for me to even approach this, I feel like I need years and years of research to do justice to this painting, to this series of paintings, because, I want it to be historically accurate, because these are things, maybe it hasn't been painted before. I'm not sure, but maybe some of these things have not been painted before. If it's like the first impression of that subject, then I want to do it justice, and I want it to be as accurate as possible. So for example, the second part of that painting series, the one in Hiroshima, the woman jumping to her death, I looked at like tons and tons of videos of, the bombings and people jumping to their death. But then, the footage is so grainy, you don't really see details. So then the next step is to look into history and see what people, for me, for that painting, I have to look at what women, rural, it was in a somewhat rural area. So I have to look at what kind of clothes they were wearing at the time. In that region, do they wear a specific kind of clothing? The lush greenery around there, what plants are there? So I just feel like, I obviously as an artist, I can approach it in my usual format, which is just I can just go and start painting and just, do it. But which is also cool because it portrays the idea. But then it's, how accurately do you want that idea portrayed is, I feel like it's something to think about for sure, especially when you're working on something that's more serious or historical.
Thank you.
I would say one more thing, if I may. I just find that looking at as much work as you can helps too, because sometimes you'll see another piece and you're not trying to copy the piece, but that piece sparks an idea. And then another piece sparks another idea. And all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, those 2 ideas go together. You know what I mean? And so I think the more things you see and the more work you see, it also helps too. Because I think research is huge, but there's also got to be an issue you care about. And then what you do with it. It's like, I was thinking to myself, my gosh, if I could answer that question, I could make $1 million, because I don't know how you explain the process. It has to bathe in your brain for a while, I think.
And like I said, my painting in this show, it took 5 years for that painting, which is very unusual for me because I paint very quickly. And you know, you sometimes there's actually, like, I feel like with every artist, the process can look so different. And even for myself, like, even though right now I'm doing research-based paintings, there was a time I would just do abstract work based on an idea. So I feel like there's no telling when will the idea come first, or will you be working on something else already and then it'll just fall into place. That also happens. But another part of your question that was also interesting is which medium to choose, which I feel like is the toughest question of all time, because like all artists struggle with this so much, including myself. And a lot of times I'll do a 2D piece of work, like I'll do a painting taking like months to complete. And then after it's complete, I'll look at it and instantly realize that, oh, this should have been a video instead. You know, so that's also something that happens, but which is also cool because an idea doesn't just have to, like, doing just one piece of art, like you can create multiple pieces of art from one idea, you know, and it can be in different mediums. So, you know, it's really up to the artist.
Thank you.
Yeah, really up to the artist, you know, and those who responded, of the panelists responded to the question. I hope there is a common theme in what they all had to say, and it is what artists are confronted with, actually, eventually, right away. You're in the midst of the journey of creating a new language. You have to find a new vocabulary to bring your idea across, and as Rohena stated, and others, is that a lot of trying, you know, a lot of different things, research. Don't be afraid to to look at and absorb the periods of art time. Labels sometimes can kind of get in the way, but and what you're after is not so much the graphic, but how the image and the point in which the artist was making, how that vocabulary is so unique. And you know, that's something that you come by, because you will quickly discover there's nothing out there, a pat thing, there's no set of ABC whatever that's going to give you that vocabulary. So that's the journey and the most interesting part, I think, of being an artist.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very insightful.
Thank you for that question.
Can I read something to everyone? This was something that helped me so immeasurably. It's a quote by Ira Glass. And Ira Glass is the guy that does This American Life, right? So I'm going to read it if you don't mind. He says, "Nobody tells this to people who are beginners. I wish someone had told me. All of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste. But there's a gap. For the first couple of years you make stuff, it's just not that good. It's trying to be good. It has potential, but it's not. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, is still killer. Your taste is why your work disappoints you. A lot of people never get past this phase. They quit. Most people I know who do interesting creative work went through years of this. We know our work doesn't have that special thing that we want it to have. We all go through this. But if you're just starting out, or if you're still in this phase, you got to know it's normal. And the most important thing you can do is do a lot of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week you finish one, in his case, story. It's only by going through a volume of work that you will ever close the gap, and your work will be as good as your ambitions. And I took longer to figure out how to do this than anyone I've ever met. It's going to take a while. It's normal to take a while. You just got to fight your way through it. I thought that was the best piece of advice I ever could have gotten.
Yeah, that's really insightful.
Yeah, bravo. That was excellent. Thank you very much. And it's a wonderful ending to our conversation tonight. I could just go on for hours with our panelists. And once again, I want to thank each and every one of you, Amanda, Rohena, Diane, Ellen, Avril, I want to thank you all for taking the time and sharing your vision, sharing Selma's work to the public. And I am confident that as more of the public go online and take a look at the show itself, that would be CoCASeattle.org, and pretty easy to navigate once you get to the main site. Take a look at it, and I'm confident that with the comments of the artists tonight, you will truly have an incredibly rich experience, not only taking in Selma's work, but also taking in the relationship that we tried to build for you in this exhibit. So once again, on behalf of CoCA, thank you everybody, and good night.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.